what I find curious is that most of the people who have a tendency to support the Patriot Act, et cetera, are self-labeled conservatives who are seemingly at the same time outraged at bigger government. And yet what I think a lot of these laws seem to do is allow government to get even larger, or at any rate, at least unchecked.
All right, Jerry, thanks very much for the call. Appreciate it. And is this, as we look at this change in policy, as you say, some critics would say this is to defuse legislation that may be coming up in the House and the Senate. But nevertheless, government secrecy was one of the things that then candidate Obama mentioned a great deal, the expansion of federal powers very broadly and government secrets in particular. Is this something that is in response to that legislation, at least according to the people you talk to, or is this something that has been working its way through and they're just getting around to it?
Well, the Obama administration has not taken an official position on those bills, the Nadler bill in the House and the Leahy bill in the Senate. And so they would say, no, this is not in response to that. This is a separate thing that we are doing internally, and Congress can take a look at it and make their own mind up about what else they might want to do. Nevertheless, I think that for the people who sort of pay close attention to these issues throughout the government, including on the Hill, it's not, you don't have to scratch very hard to see or to believe that typically when the government has a certain power that they are accused of using too promiscuously, it is a very common tactic to try to make some internal reforms, have a higher level of review and so forth, to head off legislative changes that could permanently take away that authority or restrict it or place more oversight on it in a different body, in this case the judiciary, than something that would be controlled internally.
Well, as you suggest, it's also unusual for even a campaign that railed against the expansion of federal powers to actually reduce those federal powers once in office.
Well, I think it's human nature that when you yourself want to achieve the things you've set out to achieve, you trust yourself, and human beings like power. I would not, but that's a particularly cynical thing to be. I mean, in this case, they are voluntarily adopting a higher standard, and of what will trigger what counts as something that should be kept as a state secret, and so that could be very significant. One of the things that's left unanswered by this policy change is whether they will also tell courts that the courts should use the new higher standard that they're going to be using internally, or should courts still use the lower standard that has been in existence up to now, even if the executive branch is going to hold itself to this higher standard.
Charlie Savage from the New York Times. We're talking about a change in policy by the Obama administration on state secrets. You're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. And one question, would this affect the lawsuits that are already underway?
No, this policy change only affects new assertions of the privilege going forward starting October 1st. So the very high-profile lawsuits involving the CIA's rendition program and the program of surveillance without warrants that garnered a great deal of attention earlier this year when the Obama administration continued to press forward with the Bush administration state secrets claims will continue, I think, undisturbed by this policy change.
Let's get Brian on the line. Brian with us from Raleigh, North Carolina.
Yeah, hi there. I'm one of those really conservative people who only support Obama in about, a handful of things, but I am not a big fan of state secrets or, the government looking over his shoulder. So I was hoping he would actually change the policy on this, and lo and behold, I'm disappointed again.
Oh, you thought it should have gone further?
Yeah, I wanted to see him overturn some of the secrecy that the Bush administration implemented, even though I support them on many things.
Well, as we're reading this, he is overturning some of the secrecy. He's making it harder to make something a state secret.
Good, yeah. I want to see him go even farther than that, and not just open the doors to what the government's doing.
All right, Brian, thanks very much for the call.
I could react to that briefly if you'd like.
Sure.
One of the great things that's very interesting about the debates over the escalation of executive power and secrecy over the last few years is that when this was happening after 9/11 and primarily under the Bush administration, the debate often got bogged down into sort of the typical partisan conflict. If you were a Republican, you thought that any attacks on this stuff was just Democrats trying to go after your guy. And if you were a Democrat, you thought, well, this is just the evil Bush administration doing something I don't like. And it was very hard for people who thought about it differently to make the argument at the time, or to find a receptive audience, that in fact executive power is not a partisan issue, because it's sort of abstract. It's different from ordinary political debates. And when we'll have a different party changing hands in the White House from time to time, and suddenly the things that could be used for conservative ends now could be used for liberal ends, and back and forth again. Now that the Obama administration has taken over from the Bush administration, I think it's easier for people to see that these sort of structural constitutional issues about how much power should be concentrated, how much balance and checks and balances there should be as far as judicial oversight, and Congress setting rules that the executive branch has to obey whether or not it wants to. These issues have become more crystallized and easier to see, I think, for both factions as something that exists above the ordinary tug of war we have in American politics.
We may have time for one more caller. This is Patrick calling from Arkansas.
Well, hello. How are you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure, go ahead.
The question is, with all the agencies collecting so much information, how is it that we know what's being collected is even really valuable? And again, the information that we would even want, how do we know it's even credible? Does that make any sense?
I think you're talking about overload, and really, as we looked at the information coming into the government before 9/11, yes, there were some things that might have tipped them off, and a lot of people said they should have set off alarm bells, but they were buried in a mountain of other information. So, Charlie Savage,
exactly right.
Does this do anything to winnow that pile down to make it more manageable?
No, I think that's sort of a separate issue. What the caller is talking about is the vast amounts of surveillance, primarily electronic surveillance, that's sort of coming in, and to what extent can it be analyzed and be turned into something useful, or is it just sort of sucking up communications and so forth to no useful end? This is something different. The state secrets privilege is about shutting down lawsuits. It's about a guy saying, you wiretapped me illegally, or you tortured me illegally. And instead of that person having their day in court, the executive branch being able to say, you may be suing us, but we're not going to allow you to sue us because we're going to withhold the evidence from the courtroom that would be necessary for that litigation to go forward. And so it's a very powerful tool of the executive branch, and one that has been used a great deal in recent years, and therefore has attracted a great deal of attention, because it creates, of course, quite intense tensions along the lines of accountability in the rule of law, and the ability of people to have their day in court on the one hand, and the necessary, at times, need for the government to protect national security secrets on the other.
Patrick, thanks very much for the call. And Charlie Savage, thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Charlie Savage is the Washington correspondent for the New York Times, and he spoke with us from a studio here in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow on the program, Craig Ferguson, the host of The Late Late Show, will join us to talk about stand-up, alcoholism, late night, and his version of the American dream. Join us then, if you will. This is Talk of the Nation from NPR News. I'm Neil Conan in Washington.